Well, good morning. I hope you're doing well today, and I hope you'll enjoy this lesson. I've kind of contemplated what to talk about, and I kept thinking about promises and about how we give our word and about how important that is within our spiritual lives as well as everyday life that we live. And the title of it is called The Oath of Faith. And I want to start off with a really kind of funny story, but that kind of underlines what a promise can do in both positive and a negative way. There was this old gentleman that was retired and purchased a modest home near a junior high school. He spent a few weeks there of his retirement in very quiet peace and contentment, and he was so happy with his life. And then the new school year began. And the very next afternoon, these three young boys were just full of youthful and enthusiasm after school time and came down the street and started beating merrily on the trash cans that they encountered all along the block. Well, the crashing percussion day after day, and finally the old man decided it was time to take some action because there was no peace and quiet. So the next afternoon, he walked out to meet the young percussionist as they banged their way down the street. He stopped them, and this is what he said. He said, "You know, you kids are a lot of fun. I like to see you express your exuberance like that. It is so neat to see. In fact, I used to do the same thing when I was your age. Will you do me a favor? I'll give you $1 if you'll promise to come around every day and do your thing." I mean, they were excited. "You bet," they said. "We'll do it every day," and they bang on the trash cans. Well, after a few days of doing this, the old timer, which was very wise, greeted the kids again, but this time he had a very sad smile on his face, and he said, "You know, the recession's really bad and it's put a big dent in my income," he told them. "So from now on, I can only pay you 50 cents to bang on the cans." Well, the noisemakers weren't that happy with that arrangement, but they thought, well, money is money, so they decided to continue their afternoon ruckus of making noise all along the street. A few days later, this wily old man approached them again, and he had a sad look on his face as they drummed their way down the street, and he said, "Well, you know, look, I haven't received my Social Security check yet, so I'm not going to be able to pay you more than 25 cents. Will that be okay?" "Only a quarter," the drum leader said. "That's ridiculous. If you think we're going to waste our time going up and down the street banging on these cans for just a quarter, you're nuts. No way, dude. We quit." And the old man enjoyed the peace and serenity for the rest of his days. Pretty smart for a guy. But he had made a promise, and they made a promise back to them. And that's what I want to talk about today, is about promises, and we're going to talk about the oath of faith toward the end in that term. But let's talk about promises. Now, if you told someone that you would expect them to, and they made a promise to them, or they made a promise to you, they would expect you to say something right, and they could trust you to do it, but also they would understand and expect them to keep the promise back to you. And if someone broke that promise they made you, you'd be kind of upset, I would think. And their trust of them, after promises made later on, gets weakened down because they didn't keep the ones before. Promises are so important to keep because you want others to trust you, and you just much want to trust them back. And if you don't trust them very well, then they may not continually telling you things that would usually tell you. There would be a break in communication. So promises are special to me because when I was little, I was always told by my parents that promises are important. And if they are unkept, then you may lose the one closest to you because you have betrayed them. And you don't want that to happen. So that's been drilled into my mind, and maybe yours too, growing up in the values of your home, and what's been taught to you, and maybe along the way some experiences that you've had when promises were made and kept, and how that solidified and made things so much better. And on the reverse of that, when all of a sudden someone promised you, you depended upon them, and it broke down. Now, if I promised you that this lesson won't last longer than 30 minutes, but then we hit the 45-minute mark and then maybe even the hour mark, and I'm still talking, how would you feel? Well, betrayed a little bit, maybe you felt a little lied to or set up maybe, and that I was inconsiderate of your time and your valuable time given. And don't fret, I'm not going to do that. But I want to get that thought into your head, that feeling that comes from broken promises. When people say they'll only do certain things and will do some things that we depend on, and times we failed in our promises. There's a wonderful story from the Brothers Grimm, and that's Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm, and it's entitled The Frog King. And this is how it goes. It starts with a young princess who loved to sit by the well in a forest and likes to drop her golden ball into the well and catch it when it comes back up. While she's playing this one time, she misses when the ball comes back up, and the ball drops back down into the well and stays there. Well, there's a frog nearby, starts speaking to her and gives her a condition like, if I would help you, then you must help me. She must take him back to her castle, feed him, give him water, and let him sleep in her bed. And he would get the ball for her. Well, the minute the frog got the ball and gave it back to her, she just ignored him and runs back to the castle. So when the frog comes knocking on the door, she acts like that she wanted nothing to do with him, while her father is asking her, what happened? What's going on here? And the girl, in truth, told her father, and he got really mad at her and told her that she must stick to her word. So she did just that and did everything that she was supposed to do and promised to do. And poof, the frog turned back into a king and got to go home and marry that very girl. The king, you see, must teach her daughter manners to be polite to others. It must be a pain to her to have a frog around her all the time. But she did give the frog her word, and she must keep that, like her father says, what you have promised, you must keep, which is a very important lesson in life that we all need to remind ourselves of, that we have been taught that ourselves. The most important connection I have made to this story was that promises are important to keep. And as the king said, what you have promised, you must keep. You know, it's so important to others will know that they can count on you. And when you need them, you can count on them as well. Growing up, my parents always told me that promises were important, like I said, that I should not break them. But I also told me, be careful when you make promises and what promises you do make, that you're able to keep them. And that way, they're not thrown out in a frivolous, shallow way that becomes just really a lie, ultimately. It's important also for you to be able to trust you as well as you trust others, keep the promises made. So they want to know they can trust you. They want to know that you're dependable as much as you depend on them. And when the time comes, I always debate if I can really give my word to keep that promise or not. And when I say a promise, this is very personal on my side. When I say a promise, it's like a locked-in thing. I mean, when I say I promise I will do this, it's almost like it's done. There is no going backward. If circumstances change that promise, well, then not to be explained, not just ignored, but to say I cannot because I do not have the money, or I don't have the time, or something prevented me from doing it, or that promise was made too rashly, and I apologize for that. See, but there's an integrity behind all that. And I really think that giving one's word today is a lost art. I promise I will. It sounds so majestic and solid, but it really depends upon the person and not the term, the sacred term of promise. and it needs to be used sparingly and with great conviction when it is used. Growing up, my dad emphasized that if I promised to do something, he expected me to fulfill that promise, as long as he was in control of my life at that time. When I failed because of laziness or selfishness, he reminded me of that lost trust. And that has formed my life of a moral living and a life of integrity. Now, I'm not saying that I've been perfect in this task, but when I have failed, it was a harsh lesson of guilt on my side, remorse, and I wanted to regain that trust back because I just knew those people didn't believe in my promises anymore, or it was degraded in some way. So oaths and promises are a form of giving one's word of integrity and has been part of our history as people. And according to one reference work, an oath is, quote, a solemn appeal to God to witness the truth of a statement or sincerity of a promise, coupled with an imprecation of divine judgment in the event of falsehood or breach of obligation. I'll give you an example. The same thing we're talking about here in the Hippocratic Oath in 400 BC. And this is what it says. I swear by Apollo the physician and Esculapius and health and all heal and all the gods and goddesses that according to my ability and judgment, I will keep this oath. Is that resolute or not? But that's what they do in 400 BC. And that's what it goes within the medical profession of how it goes down through time. Now, military oaths, and that's my background, and I want to share that part of it as well. We go all the way back to ancient Rome, where soldiers pledged loyalty to a specific general or a specific campaign. Did you hear that? That's different than it is today, and I'll talk about that in a sec. So after the campaign ended, the oath no longer applied to that event anymore. Now you move forward in time to 100 BC, and Rome has established a professional military, and the oath becomes effective for a 20-year service. Since then, though, this custom has continued and expanded. It was used with the Pilgrims in 1620, when the Mayflower landed as an oath, a covenant, and a constitution or allegiance, and continued to every facet of our society to gain that same allegiance. So it started at the beginning of our country. Now, why do I bring this up? It's interesting. You're going, well, where's the spiritual ramification of this? And we're going to get to that. Just hang in there because you understand the seriousness of this and how important this is and the background of it and what a core moral value it is and a sacred thing it is in our lives. Well, what about in our national military history? The oath is a significant part of our society and a solemn vow given to defend our country. It is our word and a moral piece of our national and individual fiber. It's sacred. Now, I say this with emphasis because I lived this for 34 years in the military. And after every time I was promoted, and by tradition, we would stand on a stage in front of all of our peers and all of our subordinate soldiers all around us and family members. We would stand before the American flag, and a senior officer would be in front of us, a leader. We'd put our hands up, and we would then take the oath of allegiance once again. It was an emotional time. I will never forget that. Every time I did that, I realized what I was saying. I realized what I was promising to my nation and to my fellow soldiers. I would be there with them, and I would defend my country with my very life. So let me share with you that oath real quickly about when I did that oath, and me and all my others as well in the military, and they still do it today. What does that mean? Well, it starts out this way. I state your name, Ray Bailey, for example, do solemnly swear or affirm, and then we repeat that. Now, the oath begins with an option to swear or affirm. The term clearly has a religious connotation in the late 1700s. The oath signifies a public statement of personal commitment. Those who take this oath must take a personal responsibility for their actions. I do solemnly swear or affirm. I do this. The second thing we say that we repeat, that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Now, the oath requires the service member, me, for example, to support and defend the Constitution, not the president, not the country, nor the flag, and not any particular military service. It didn't say, I will support the Army. It says, I will support the Constitution. It symbolizes the president. It symbolizes the country, the flag, and the military, and much more beyond that. As the government has checks and balances, the oath is given to all parts of the government equally. It's part of our democratic system. So I am promising that I will support and defend our democracy, of our identity as a nation. Our preservation, no matter what, is paramount in my focus. The next thing we say is, against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Now, this was added as a result of the Civil War to ensure that Union soldiers didn't fight for the Confederacy. Though we have little concern about a civil war again, our military must still be prepared to defend our country of enemies and any contingencies. The terrorist attacks of 9/11, for example, is an example of being prepared. Our oath demands us that we support and defend all enemies, wherever they may be. The next phrase is that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. The Army's core value of selfless service provides a reflective connotation of the value of serving others. Those who take this oath are compelled to work together as a team to develop the best solutions for our nation, rather than engage in inter-service, Army against Navy and Air Force, wherever it may be, competition that suppresses our nation as a second, and obtain the biggest piece of the defense budget trying to get more money. The nation always comes first, above any inter-service, by anything else. The next one is this, that I take this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion. So here is the very core of integrity and honor. Integrity is a learned trait, whether that learning is based upon religious upbringing or embracing acceptable norms of our society. Honor and integrity are part of the very core of military services. And we maintain that integrity is so implicit in our oath. It must guide leaders when they face conflicts of interest and hard choices. But that's the core thing of our integrity, that we mean what we say when we take this pledge and this oath. And then we say, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I'm about to enter. Now we go from service now to duty. We must be proactive and perform our duties to the best of our abilities, mastering our specialties while we're beginning our military service and continuing on, and then gaining the breadth and advance in rank and responsibility. We grow with it. We bring that integrity. We bring that responsibility to every level we go to. The progress of our nation depends upon this. And we always finish it off by saying, so help me God. And this is the most important phrase of the oath, in my opinion. Our actions have a moral, and though the Supreme Being has religious implications of it, that we take this because the Supreme Being now is hearing my promise, my oath. And before the Supreme Being, I am promising I will do this. Our American history is replete with examples of public appeals of higher being for guidance and protection. It wasn't until 1962 that the enlisted oath, then just officers, was given, and then they themselves would take an oath as well, because they wanted to ensure, Congress did, that all assets of our services, their sincerity of undertaking what we're supposed to do as defense of our nation. Now, I bring all this up because it sounds like, okay, that's interesting, because I want to show the importance of how it's part of our national issues, it's part of our personal life, taking an oath and giving promises. And even and we do it many times, so help me God, for example, as a thing we do and promise it before God. And that weight of that we must feel in our lives. It's a moral statement that buttresses the very freedom of us and all we are. It's giving one's word, our integrity, our loyalty in the defense of freedom promised in our Constitution. And without the hand of God on our land and the strength of our military, government officials, and the very heart of every citizen, then our nation is at peril unless we have this. So as you see the flag flying and our national anthem is played and hear the marching of soldiers' feet, remember it is built upon giving our word and moral obligation. So help me God. So why is it so important to keep a promise for our own lives and maybe for our very souls? So what was the last promise you made to anyone? Well, did you keep it? For example, did you say, yes, honey, I promise I'll take the trash out after dinner. I promise I'll pick you up and take you to church or maybe shopping or to the doctor's office. I'll be right there. You depend on me. I'll be there, I promise. I promise I'll write. I promise I'll pray for you. We throw this promise out sometimes pretty liberally, but we need to feel the weight of that word, because involved in that word is integrity, our trust and loyalty is involved in that, and our very identity of our depth of who we are. If you're like most people, you make a commitment to others all the time. But the question is, how often do you keep that promise? It's impossible to follow through on every single one you make in your life. I mean, how many have broken them? I have done it many times. And how do you handle it, though, when it is broken? What do you do to help understand what happened with it? Remember the last time you made a promise and you didn't keep it? Well, how did that feel? Did it eat at you a little bit inside and kind of make you feel really guilty? Did it kind of take some energy away from you and kind of leave you a little bit depressed? Well, I hope it did, because it does me that way. That's called integrity. That's called moral conscience, that we have promised. We've given ourselves into that word. I'll give you a funny example of that I think is one of my favorites I've heard all my life. There was a man who spoke to his 3 sons, and he sent them all to college. And he said, I feel it's my duty to provide you with the best possible education, and you don't owe me anything. However, I want you to appreciate it. So as a gesture of appreciation, please promise that you will put $1,000 into my coffin when I die, just to show that you appreciate it. Well, it so happened the man did die. His sons were a doctor, a financial planner, and a lawyer. And they were all very successful. So when he was in his coffin at the funeral time, they all remembered his wish and the promise they had made. First, the doctor stacked up 10 crisp $100 bills and laid them on the chest of his father. Said, I promise, Dad, here they are. Next, the financial planner placed $1,000 more of 20 crisp bills, 50 of them, onto the chest of his father. Well, finally, it was the heartbroken lawyer's turn. He slowly reached into his pocket, removed his checkbook, wrote a check for $3,000, put it into his father's coffin, and took the $2,000 cash back, as only a lawyer would do. But is that really the right kind of promise to make? Is that the integrity part? Even though it's humorous, it has a little bit of ring of truth to it, how some people treat promises. As long as it serves them, then that their promise means something. But their promises back to them has very little and shallow depth to it. Just so we're clear, a promise defined by Webster Dictionary is, quote, a declaration that one will do or refrain from doing something specified, or a legally binding declaration that gives the person to whom it is made a right to expect or to claim the performance or forbearance of a specified act. And that's kind of a wordy way of saying the same thing I've been saying. I looked it up some more. What about oath? What does that mean? Well, it says this in Webster: a solemn promise, often invoking a divine witness regarding one's future action or behavior. Example, they took an oath of allegiance to the king. Okay? And other words can fit in that way as well. Another word is vow, a sworn statement, a pledge, affirmation, and some more words like that that all mean the same thing. But on the reverse side of that word is a negative connotation of it. It's also defined as a coarse or blasphemous word or phrase used to express anger or some strong emotion. For example, it says, he exploded with a mouthful of oaths. You've heard people do that, okay? When we don't keep a promise to someone, it communicates to that person that we don't value him or her. We have chosen to put something else ahead of our commitment. Even when we break small promises, others learn that they cannot count on us. Tiny fissures develop in our relationship marked by these broken promises along the way. So every time we make a promise, it's weaker and weaker and weaker because of we've been weakened down through time of all the broken ones. We're not only communicating with others, we're also telling others that we don't value our own word. We think it's okay to let someone down or say something that we don't mean or to fail to follow through on something that we said we would do. Not keeping a promise is the same as disrespecting yourself. Ultimately, it can't harm our self-image, self-esteem, or our life because our word is frivolous and it doesn't mean anything to us either. If you're making more commitments than you can keep, ask yourself the following questions. What is my motivation for this promise? Why am I making a particular commitment? What is my intention? Am I doing this for the recipient or for myself? And sometimes, with these questions answered, we do sometimes purely out of good intentions. We make promises. Other times it's for what we will receive back if we make it. We might believe that we need to say yes to get what we want or to ensure someone might believe that we could say that and depend on us and like us for it. And it's our popularity, if you will. We tell people what they want to believe and hear, and that will make them happy. But be honest with yourself about why you are committing to something. What are you getting out of the deal? That might cause you to whether you should make the promise in the first place of all, with wisdom and integrity, before you make that oath or that promise. Someone told me this little anecdote, which I think is funny, but it's sadly funny, about promises. Do all fairy tales start with once upon a time? The answer is no. Some start with, if I'm elected, I promise. That's sadly so true. Is it crucial for me to make a promise? There's nothing in life that says you must make promises. We all can't stand the boss who looks us in the eye and commits to something we can't or won't deliver. Don't be that kind of person. If you don't know if you can come through or not, it's fine to simply set appropriate expectations. Tell your neighbor that you would love to help plan a party or do something for them, but you're unsure if you can do it because of your schedule or that you may not know what's going to happen the next few weeks. Be honest with it. Say, I'm going to try hard to do it. And that itself is important as well. People expect honesty, even when faced with an answer that may not be exactly what they want to hear. So don't make promises because they need to hear it to make them feel better, but it puts our integrity at stake. I remember a story my dad told years ago that I think it's really humorous. There was a politician who visited a village and asked what their needs were. Well, said the villager, we have two needs in our village. First, we have a hospital, but we don't have a doctor. On hearing that, the politician whipped out his cell phone, and after speaking for a while, he assured the village that the doctor would be there the next day. He then says, well, what's your second problem? And the villager said, well, sir, there is no cell phone coverage anywhere in our village. Ouch, he got caught, didn't he? So when I break a promise, how do I handle it? And how do I handle it well? Well, when we unexpectedly get the holiday shift at work, or we let our family down, and we're going to say we're going to do something, how do we recover from that moment? What is the way that we go back to ensure that we're still honest and our intent of what we want to do is still there? Because plans change, because circumstances change that we cannot control. But how we come back and recover from that promise, or state with them and talk to them about it, to let them know that I am so sorry. They know that we intended to keep that promise, but these circumstances beyond my control prevented me from it. That's the proper way of doing it, because they know that human frailty is still there. But our intent from our heart, from our integrity, the honesty in us, that we want to do it. So keeping these things in mind can help us manage commitments more effectively, and helps us feel positive about our track record. Keeping our promises is good for others and good for us as well. Now let's get in with a little more spiritual at the closing here, because I want you to see how important this is in everyday life, at a national level, within a personal level. Now let's go to our very souls. Oaths are not evil within themselves, unless the purpose is to destroy someone, like that second meaning of oath I mentioned earlier, or go against the will of God. Then it becomes evil. An oath is not intrinsically evil. I mean, even Jehovah bound himself under an oath to Abraham when he promised to bless the patriarch. In Hebrews it says, with reference to the priesthood of God, hath sworn, you are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Hath sworn. Since the Lord is perfect, one must conclude that an oath is not all that sinful. For example, it says he testified with an oath. When Jesus was on trial, the high priest said, I adjure you by the living God that you tell me whether you are the Christ, the Son of God. Well, the word adjure translates into the Greek exorchizo, which means to extract an oath, to force an oath. So what he was trying to do here, the high priest, was to make Jesus give an oath, a statement of integrity, a state of truth from him. Caiaphas put the Lord under oath, hoping that he would incriminate himself. And Jesus honestly responded, you have said, which, as language authorities note, is a Greek affirmative reply. So Mark's parallel has it even plainer. I am, is the way Mark said it. This is the same expression used by Jesus when Jesus asked the Lord, is it I? That's the response he gave back. Paul made an oath. The Apostle Paul employed an oath when he wrote to the Corinthians, and he said this in 2 Corinthians, but I call God for a witness upon my soul that I spare you, I forbear to come unto Corinth. And remember, he wrote those words by inspiration. Now observe the apostle's strong statement in this statement. Now concerning the things which I write unto you, behold, before God I lie not. That's from Galatians. Before God I lie not. So let me go to a conclusion here of where I'm going to on this point. This may touch on some toes here a little bit. For example, how many people read the small print on the cell phone agreements? I don't very often do it. Whether users read the details or not, they're bound by them once they sign the dotted line that they will do that. And many times inside on web pages, they'll say, if you will adhere to all these things, just say, I agree, and then let you into the site. You just gave your word. Likewise, many churchgoers fully understand what they're saying when they join in the profession of the creed. But do they appreciate that when they say, I believe, they are pledging themselves and promising, along with the rest of the Christian church, to the realities expressed in the church. I'll read it to you. I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Spirit, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, dead, and buried. The third day he rose from the dead. He ascended into heaven, and sitteth at the right hand of God the Father Almighty. From thence he shall come to judge the quick and the dead. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, and forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. Amen. When we say that in our church services, we're making a promise. We're taking an oath of faith. There are three things that Christ has promised us. First, he says in Psalms, he won't leave you brokenhearted. And then in John, he says, he won't reject you. And then in Hebrews, he says, he won't leave you or forsake you. So in essence, Jesus is never going to give you up, never going to let you down, and never going to run around and desert you. He promises. And we know that we can depend on him keeping his word. Now, back to our creed, back to our promise to God in our prayers. What do we promise him? I'll let you think about that a little bit, and I hope it has touched your heart and your soul that when you say promises to every day in your life, how important they are. And if you're doing a good job of that, keep going. But if you need to tweak yourself and say, I need to make less promises because I have a problem keeping them, or maybe you just have it reversed the way it should be. Most importantly, though, when you stand before God and you speak to him, he's taking you at his word as much as we depend on him keeping his promises. The Lord bless you today.